Have you ever wondered what makes some messages stay long after the words are gone? Tonight, we'll slow down and explore the quiet science of understanding. How tone, rhythm, and intention turn speech into connection. Let yourself drift through knowledge that feels as calm as breath, as steady as thought before sleep. Stay with me until the end. There's a gentle rhythm waiting to unfold. And if this peaceful journey speaks to you, please subscribe, like, and leave a comment. It truly helps Calm Science Sleep reach new listeners and inspires me to create more soothing stories. Communication often begins long before a single word is spoken. It starts in the quiet space between thoughts, in the subtle awareness that another mind exists in front of us, waiting to meet ours halfway. To communicate effectively is not simply to express an idea, but to shape an environment where that idea can be received without resistance. After listening to this chapter, you may discover that strengthening a message has less to do with eloquence and more to do with clarity, pace, and presence. Human speech is an intricate dance between physiology and psychology. Our voices are carried by moving air, vibrating through the vocal folds, resonating in the cavities of the chest and skull, and transformed into meaning by the auditory cortex of another brain. This biological pathway is shared by all people, yet the success of communication depends on far more than anatomy. It depends on attention, a scarce cognitive resource that fluctuates throughout a conversation. Neuroscientists have observed that the brain's attentional rhythm often follows the speaker's cadence. When a speaker maintains a moderate pace, listeners' neural oscillations align more easily, allowing comprehension to deepen. That is one of the reasons why slow, deliberate speech can seem more trustworthy and easier to absorb. Itself evolved not only to transmit information, but also to coordinate understanding. In early human groups, gestures, facial expressions, and prosody, the music of speech, preceded complex grammar. Even now, our brains respond to tone faster than to meaning. A warm, steady tone activates networks associated with safety, while abrupt or unpredictable patterns activate vigilance. In this sense, being understood begins with creating physiological ease in the listener. When people feel safe, they interpret words more accurately and remember them more clearly. Another essential element of clarity lies in simplicity. Psycholinguistic studies show that short, direct sentences reduce cognitive load, freeing working memory for interpretation instead of decoding. Complex clauses and unnecessary abstractions might sound impressive, yet they often obscure intention. Simple language does not diminish intelligence. It reveals it. Albert Einstein once noted that any idea worth sharing can be explained so clearly that even a child could follow its logic. This principle applies beyond science. In daily conversation, simplicity invites empathy. It tells the other person that we respect their mental energy enough not to waste it. Understanding is also shaped by context. Every listener brings a unique frame of reference, past experiences, emotions, and expectations. When these frames align, communication feels effortless. When they diverge, misunderstanding emerges even between people of good will. Linguists call this phenomenon common ground. Effective communicators tend to check whether common ground exists before introducing new information. They might restate what has been agreed upon or paraphrase what the other has said, signaling that shared understanding is already in place. Such gentle alignment builds trust, which then amplifies the power of every following sentence. Trust also depends on congruence, the subtle match between words, tone, and body language. If a person speaks warmly, but their facial muscles remain tense, the listener's mirror neuron system detects the inconsistency within fractions of a second. The result is a faint but measurable discomfort. True coherence comes from internal calm, when thought, emotion, and speech follow the same rhythm. This state can be trained through mindful awareness of one's physiological cues, the position of the shoulders, the steadiness of breathing, the softness of the jaw. Such awareness turns communication from performance into presence. Presence is often misunderstood as assertiveness or dominance, but in reality, it is a form of availability. To be present is to remove internal noise so that attention can rest entirely on the moment. Psychologists studying flow describe this as a balance between challenge and ease. When we are fully engaged yet unhurried, both hemispheres of the brain cooperate smoothly. The left structures syntax and logic, while the right interprets emotion and prosody. Listeners unconsciously perceive this balance as authenticity. Consider how children learn to understand before they can speak. They attune to rhythm, not vocabulary. A parent's soothing repetition teaches pattern recognition long before meaning. Adults are no different. We grasp the pattern first, then the content. If the rhythm of speech is irregular or rushed, comprehension falters. Thus, an effective message begins with predictable pacing, a tempo that mirrors calm breathing without consciously referring to it. There is also the dimension of feedback. Communication is dynamic, not linear. Each nod, pause, or micro-expression informs the next phrase. In virtual or written communication, where these cues are absent, misunderstanding increases dramatically. That is why clear structure and pacing matter even in text or recorded speech. They compensate for missing human signals by providing rhythm and hierarchy. A paragraph break can function like a breath. A brief silence can reset attention. From a cognitive standpoint, understanding occurs when sensory input, working memory, and long-term knowledge intersect. If new information fits smoothly into existing schemas, it feels intuitive. If it contradicts them without explanation, it feels confusing. An effective communicator therefore guides the listener step by step, connecting each idea to something already familiar. This incremental building, a kind of mental bridgework, prevents overload and sustains curiosity. It is similar to how teachers in the early stages of learning a language introduce words through context rather than translation. Each new element grows naturally from what has already been understood. Emotion shapes every level of this process. Even in technical discussions, emotional tone frames perception. A calm, balanced delivery reduces defensive listening and widens attention. The amygdala, often associated with threat detection, becomes less reactive when auditory cues indicate steadiness. This biological calm allows the prefrontal cortex to engage in reasoning and empathy. In simpler terms, we understand best when we feel safe. That is why raising the voice or overemphasizing urgency rarely strengthens a message. It narrows the listener's mental window. Another aspect of being understood is timing. Our brains process speech in chunks lasting roughly half a second. If too many ideas arrive within that span, comprehension declines. Pausing between concepts, even briefly, gives the brain time to integrate information into coherent meaning. Such pauses are not empty. They are functional silences that allow neurons to synchronize. When used with care, they turn speech into something closer to music, structured, rhythmic, and breathable. Social scientists have long studied how communication builds social cohesion. Experiments on linguistic synchrony show that people who subtly mirror each other's phrasing feel more connected. This does not require imitation. Rather, it emerges naturally when both sides listen deeply. In those moments, language becomes a shared system instead of an individual act. That, perhaps, is the quiet essence of being understood, to experience that our inner world has momentarily touched another. Modern technology has expanded communication beyond physical presence, yet the principles remain the same. Even through text or recorded voice, the human brain seeks rhythm, warmth, and coherence. Algorithms can transmit messages faster than ever, but they cannot replace the biological intimacy of tone and pace. In an age of constant notifications and fragmented attention, slowing down our delivery is not inefficiency, it is precision. Each measured word stands out against the noise. Much like a calm pulse amid static dot in practical terms, strengthening one's message can begin with observation. Notice how others respond when you speak slowly versus quickly, when your sentences are short versus layered. Pay attention to their posture, eye movement, or stillness. Over time, these patterns reveal the balance point where your natural expression meets the listener's comfort. From that balance emerges effortless clarity. Ultimately, the gentle art of being understood is a form of empathy expressed through structure. It requires self-knowledge, awareness of how our own nervous system influences the words we choose, and respect for the cognitive rhythm of others. When both are present, communication becomes less about persuasion and more about resonance. Words stop competing for attention and start aligning with comprehension. You may imagine the process as a steady rhythm, similar to the slow alignment of heartbeats that sometimes occurs between people in quiet conversation. This subtle synchronization does not depend on technique. It arises naturally when both sides are calm and attentive. Understanding, then, is not achieved by force, but allowed to unfold as we leave this first reflection. One idea remains. Communication is not an act of transmission, but of connection. Its strength comes from clarity, congruence, and the patient pacing of meaning. And before we explore how something as simple as a breath can refine that strength, before we turn to the rhythm that underlies every spoken line, it is enough to recognize that the foundation of every powerful message is gentleness itself. Before any sentence finds its voice, there is a brief and often unnoticed moment when the body prepares for sound. This preparation begins with a breath, a small rhythmic act that quietly shapes the quality of our voice, the steadiness of our tone, and even the clarity of our thoughts. A controlled breath gives structure to language and establishes the rhythm that listeners instinctively follow. To understand why this matters, it helps to look at how breathing and speaking coexist within the human body. Speech is a complex cooperation of systems. The lungs provide air. The larynx transforms that air into vibration, and the articulators shape it into recognizable words. Subtle variations in breathing patterns change everything from vocal warmth to perceived confidence. When the breath is shallow, the voice tightens. When it is full and steady, sound carries ease and continuity. Listeners may not consciously recognize the difference, yet their bodies respond to it. Tension mirrors tension. Calm invites calm. Physiological studies show that speakers who begin their sentences after a full diaphragmatic breath are rated as more confident and persuasive. The reason lies in simple physics. Consistent air pressure beneath the vocal folds stabilizes vibration and produces a richer, smoother tone. It is not the amount of air that matters, but the steadiness with which it is released. Controlled exhalation provides the foundation of vocal balance. This relationship between breath and emotion is ancient. Long before language, breath was a signal of state. A sigh meant relief. A gasp meant alarm. Even today, Our respiratory rhythm communicates mood without words. The human nervous system contains mirror mechanisms that respond to the sound of another person's breathing. Hearing someone speak with calm, steady respiration subtly lowers our own heart rate, a process known as respiratory entrainment. The body listens as much as the mind. Modern life often disrupts this harmony. Constant alertness shortens the breath and raises the pitch of the voice. The diaphragm tightens, and speech begins to sound hurried even when the message is gentle. Voice therapists restore balance by grounding the body, softening the abdomen, and guiding exhalation rather than forcing it. These are not performance tricks, but physiological resets, reminders of the tempo. Our species evolved to speak within. Cognitive science confirms that this rhythm shapes comprehension. Studies using brainwave mapping reveal that listeners understand speech more efficiently when it matches their own breathing cycles. The pauses between phrases act as punctuation for the mind, giving time for integration. In this sense, breath organizes not only muscles, but cognition itself, marking the natural boundaries of thought. Skilled speakers embody this connection. They do not suppress anxiety. They pace it. Each sentence becomes a measured exhalation. Syntax follows respiration, and emotion follows syntax. The result is clarity that feels effortless. Even in ordinary conversation, a single full breath before replying can prevent impulsive speech. The small delay engages the reflective regions of the brain, turning reaction into response. The breath becomes a boundary between feeling and articulation, the pause where understanding begins. Biologically, this calm rhythm travels through the vagus nerve, which links brainstem and body. When breathing slows, the vagal tone increases, lowering stress hormones and stabilizing voice resonance. A steady vagal rhythm produces sounds perceived as grounded and trustworthy. Quick or erratic breathing reduces this effect. Allowing adrenaline to dominate, the voice sharpens, phrases shorten, and meaning becomes less stable. Across cultures, this connection has long been recognized. Classical Greek orators trained to match each sentence to the length of one natural exhalation. In Eastern philosophies, breath was seen as a bridge between body and word. Though their language differed, both traditions understood that breath shapes emotion as surely as it shapes sound. Acoustic research confirms this wisdom. Voices supported by consistent diaphragmatic airflow exhibit fewer micro-fluctuations, tiny irregularities that make tone feel strained. This steadiness creates voices that are easier to listen to and more enduring. Radio presenters and narrators rely on it intuitively, using breath not only to speak, but to maintain listener attention. In everyday life, the same principle keeps conversation clear and fatigue low when communication becomes charged. During argument, performance, or stress, the breath reveals imbalance first. Awareness of that shift allows gentle correction. A single, complete breath can reset the entire system, restoring tone and clarity. It is not an act of control, but of release, the body returning to equilibrium. Once the breath steadies, thought expands and empathy reappears. Neuroscience even connects this pattern to rhythm in brain waves. When breathing slows to around 10 to 12 cycles per minute, it aligns with the brain's theta frequencies, those associated with relaxed focus and linguistic organization. Slow breathing, therefore, synchronizes mental tempo with the natural cadence of language. Silence, too, plays its part. The pause before a sentence is a sign of awareness. It tells the listener that words are being chosen, not spilled. Across languages, these micropauses coordinate turn-taking, keeping conversation fluid and respectful. They remind us that meaning begins in quiet, Preparation. Learning to breathe before speaking is less a matter of performance and of mindfulness. Most people can talk on shallow air, but doing so drains energy and narrows expression. Conscious breathing restores economy and presence, using just enough air for each phrase, no more, no less. Over time, this awareness refines both speech and temperament. Communication becomes a cooperation of rhythms, lungs, mind, and message working together as one coherent flow. Each inhalation prepares the next idea. Each exhalation carries it to completion. The speaker who respects this pattern does not need force to be heard. The message travels naturally, balanced within its own current. Breathing before speaking, then, is not ceremony, but science, a quiet calibration of body and thought. It steadies the nervous system, slows reaction, and allows meaning to take shape before it leaves the mouth. It is the smallest action that can transform how others hear us and how we hear ourselves. And from this steady breath grows something deeper, the calm within the words themselves. The next step in understanding how stillness shapes sound and how sound carries stillness in return. Every word we speak carries more than information. Beneath the surface of language flows a rhythm of emotion, attention, and physiology that listeners perceive even before meaning forms. Calmness within speech is not simply a lack of tension. It is a measurable state, one where body and mind cooperate to maintain coherence. When words arise from calm, their structure changes, tone stabilizes, phrasing slows, and silence begins to work as part of expression. Linguists describe language as a sequence of acoustic events. Yet these events depend on how evenly energy moves through the vocal system. In calm speech, airflow is steady, muscles release unnecessary contraction, and resonance expands naturally through the chest and mouth. The resulting sound spectrum shows lower variability and amplitude, less harshness, fewer abrupt peaks. Listeners interpret these features as warmth or sincerity, though few realize they are responding to physiology rather than intention. Psycholinguistic studies reveal that the emotional quality of a voice shapes comprehension more strongly than word choice itself. When the tone is calm, the brain's auditory cortex processes speech with lower activation in the amygdala, the region linked to threat detection. This means that listeners literally hear more clearly when the speaker is tranquil. Anxiety in a voice increases vigilance in the listener's brain, diverting resources from comprehension toward protection. Calmness therefore functions not as decoration, but as an essential condition for understanding from a neurological point of view. This effect relies on synchrony between slow oscillations in the speaker's and listeners' brains. These oscillations, roughly 4 to 8 cycles per second, coordinate how syllables are perceived and grouped. A calm tempo allows these rhythms to align, improving both recall and empathy. Communication becomes a form of shared timing, a duet of nervous systems rather than a transfer of data. The calm within words also reflects cognitive clarity. Under stress, speech becomes fragmented. Clauses shorten, pronouns replace nouns, and intonation grows erratic. Linguists studying crisis communication found that when people regained calm, their sentences lengthened and grammar stabilized. The ability to maintain syntactic complexity under pressure indicates prefrontal control, the brain's capacity to organize thought beyond emotion. In this way, calm speech is not passive. It is an active demonstration of regulation. In educational and clinical environments, this regulation has tangible impact. Teachers who modulate tone and maintain unhurried rhythm increase student retention and emotional stability in the classroom. Therapists who speak slowly and evenly activate parasympathetic responses in clients, lowering heart rate and muscular tension. Measured communication becomes an instrument of co-regulation, guiding not only understanding but physical state. The voice itself adapts to this function. Acoustic analysis shows that calm voices occupy a narrower pitch range, centered around lower frequencies where human hearing is most sensitive. This balance makes speech more intelligible with less effort. The auditory system, optimized for mid-range frequencies, perceives these tones as soothing. Excessive high-frequency energy, common intense voices, fatigues the listener's auditory nerves more quickly. Calm articulation, then, is both emotionally and biologically efficient in daily interaction. CALM language fosters trust because it signals predictability. People unconsciously associate steady tempo and balanced tone with emotional safety. In organizational settings, leaders who maintain this calm pattern under pressure are perceived as more competent and reliable. The effect persists even when content remains constant, proof that composure itself communicates. The cultural dimension of calm speech varies, yet its underlying biology remains constant. In Japanese communication styles, long pauses are valued as signs of respect. In Mediterranean cultures, calmness appears through melodic modulation rather than silence. Both achieve the same neural effect. They slow the listener's processing tempo to match the speaker's rhythm. Calmness is thus not about volume or speed alone, but about synchrony, the shared pulse of understanding. Cognitive linguists note that words, spoken calmly, tend to evoke broader semantic networks. Listeners given identical information in tranquil versus urgent tone recall more associations and interpret the message as more nuanced. The slower rhythm allows higher cortical areas to integrate meaning rather than react. This is why lectures, meditations, or bedtime explanations delivered in calm voice feel more profound. The brain has time to build connections. The relationship between calm and creativity follows the same pattern. When speech slows and the nervous system settles, alpha brain waves, linked to relaxed alertness, increase. In this state, people generate more original phrasing and metaphoric thought. Calmness enhances flexibility, not dullness. The stiller the mind, the greater its capacity for subtlety. A soft metaphor may illustrate this principle. Words are like ripples on still water. Clarity appears only when the surface is undisturbed. When speech comes from agitation, the ripples collide and distort the reflection. Calmness allows thought to mirror itself faithfully before it reaches another mind, even in conflict. Calm language carries strength. Negotiation specialists find that maintaining steady rhythm and low volume under stress reduces aggression and accelerates resolution. The calm voice does not signal weakness, it signals control. It redefines authority as stability rather than dominance. Such communication models, a form of leadership, rooted in emotional intelligence rather than reaction. Technology amplifies the need for this awareness. Digital communication compresses tone, removes facial cues, and exaggerates small fluctuations in timing. A calm pace and clear enunciation help restore human presence through the limitations of microphones and bandwidth. In virtual environments, composure becomes the new clarity. Ultimately, CALM speech transforms interaction from performance into resonance. The goal is not to impress, but to align, to create conditions where both speaker and listener inhabit the same rhythm of thought. Each sentence becomes a continuation of breathing, each pause an opening for connection. Calmness turns language into a steady current, carrying meaning rather than forcing it forward. As we step from this quiet layer of understanding, the next reflection begins to form, an exploration of how simplicity itself strengthens every message. For within the still rhythm of calm words lies a deeper principle, that communication gains power not from complexity, but from clarity, the quiet art of saying just enough. In every form of communication, from the smallest daily exchange to the most complex scientific explanation, simplicity acts as the quiet architecture that holds understanding together. It does not mean emptiness or lack of detail, but precision, the deliberate choice of what truly matters. To speak simply is to respect the listener's cognitive capacity. To present ideas in a structure the brain can easily follow without losing depth. Within the calm science of communication, simplicity is not a reduction of meaning, but its purification. Human cognition is shaped by limitation. Working memory, the mental workspace where we hold and manipulate information, can contain only a few units at once. Cognitive psychologists describe this constraint as a bottleneck through which every message must pass. When sentences become unnecessarily long or overloaded with subordinate clauses, comprehension declines. The mind divides attention between decoding syntax and extracting sense, and both suffer. Simplicity removes this friction. It frees the brain's limited resources for interpretation rather than repair. This is why clear expression often feels effortless to hear, not because the content is shallow, but because the structure fits the natural rhythm of thought throughout history. The link between simplicity and wisdom has appeared repeatedly. Philosophers from ancient Greece to modern times have emphasized that clarity is the hallmark of true understanding. Socrates urged his students to define terms before debating them, revealing that confusion often hides in language itself. Centuries later, scientists such as Isaac Newton and Marie Curie continued this tradition by expressing profound discoveries in plain words. Their language did not impress through ornamentation, but through restraint. Even in literature, writers known for elegance, for instance, Ernest Hemingway or George Orwell, built their style on brevity and directness. They understood that readers remember images and ideas more easily when the verbal structure is transparent. From a linguistic standpoint, simplicity has measurable effects. Sentences composed of common vocabulary and familiar grammatical patterns activate fewer cortical regions in the brain, which allows processing to occur faster and with less energy expenditure. This efficiency increases retention. When listeners recall a message hours or days later, they tend to reproduce it in their own words if the original phrasing was concise. Complex expressions, by contrast, often dissolve into vagueness because they were never fully integrated into memory. Neuroscientists call this difference semantic accessibility, the ease with which a concept can be retrieved from storage. In communication, accessibility equals endurance. There is also a moral dimension to simplicity. In public discourse, where information competes for attention, complexity can sometimes be used to obscure meaning or assert dominance. Jargon, excessive abstraction, and technical inflation create barriers that exclude rather than include. Simplicity, by contrast, invites participation. It democratizes knowledge by allowing anyone to follow the path of reasoning without needing specialized training. This does not mean oversimplifying to the point of distortion. Rather, it means presenting complexity in layers that the listener can ascend gradually. The clearest teachers and communicators often build understanding step by step, each idea resting securely on the previous one. The effectiveness of simple language has been confirmed in numerous empirical studies. Researchers in health communication found that patients given medical instructions, written at an elementary reading level, were significantly more likely to follow them accurately than those given the same instructions in professional terminology. Similarly, in legal or financial contexts, Documents expressed in plain English reduce disputes and improve trust. The brain perceives simplicity as a sign of honesty because it correlates with transparency. Complex wording, even when necessary, can trigger suspicion, suggesting hidden intention. The preference for simplicity is therefore not only cognitive but emotional. In organizational environments, simplicity enhances coordination. When teams define goals in straightforward terms, collaboration improves because ambiguity decreases. Managers who use concise statements of purpose, such as, "We aim to reduce waste," rather than "We seek to implement a comprehensive sustainability optimization strategy," see faster alignment among members. The shorter phrasing eliminates interpretation errors. This phenomenon illustrates how linguistic economy reduces what engineers call noise, the interference that distorts a signal. Human communication follows the same principle: less noise, clearer signal. Simplicity also benefits the speaker. When preparing to convey information, formulating it in simple terms requires deeper understanding. To express an idea clearly, one must first clarify it internally. The act of simplification forces organization of thought, exposing any gaps or contradictions. That is why many educators advise students to explain complex topics as if teaching a beginner. Doing so reveals whether comprehension is genuine or partial. Cognitive scientists refer to this as the Feynman technique, named after physicist Richard Feynman, who believed that if something cannot be explained simply, it has not been fully understood. The method rests on the recognition that clarity of language and clarity of mind are inseparable. From a neurological perspective, comprehension relies on pattern recognition. The brain constantly searches for structure, beginnings, middles, and endings within the stream of speech. Simplicity aligns with this pattern-seeking tendency by minimizing surprises in syntax and maximizing predictability in logic. Predictable structures reduce processing effort and allow attention to focus on meaning. This does not mean monotony, which can disengage, but coherence. A well-structured argument, even on a challenging subject, feels natural to follow because it matches the rhythm of neural expectation. Another aspect of simplicity lies in its ability to preserve emotional calm. When information is delivered in complex or ambiguous language, listeners experience a mild form of cognitive dissonance, a mismatch between what they hear and what they can immediately comprehend. This dissonance increases physiological arousal, including elevated heart rate and subtle muscle tension. Clear, straightforward phrasing removes the uncertainty that triggers these responses. The result is not merely faster understanding, but a measurable reduction in stress. Simplicity, in this sense, becomes a tool of empathy. It considers the listener's comfort as part of the message itself. In technological communication, where messages are transmitted through screens rather than shared physical presence, simplicity becomes even more vital. Without tone, gesture, or facial expression to guide interpretation, words must carry the full weight of meaning. Short sentences and unambiguous structure prevent misinterpretation that could otherwise arise from missing social cues. This is why digital interfaces, instruction manuals, and online education platforms rely on concise wording. The principle of user-centered design echoes linguistic simplicity. Clarity minimizes cognitive load and maximizes usability. However, simplicity should not be confused with lack of nuance. The challenge lies in balancing accessibility with precision. In scientific writing, for example, removing all technical terms would distort accuracy, but defining them clearly within context restores understanding. The goal is not to flatten complexity, but to organize it so that each layer becomes comprehensible in sequence. Think of it as clearing a path through dense forest rather than cutting the forest down. The terrain remains rich, but navigation becomes possible. The preference for simplicity is deeply human. Infants respond more readily to repetitive patterns and predictable intonation. Children learn through stories that follow linear, uncomplicated plots. These early cognitive tendencies persist into adulthood. Even when dealing with advanced topics, the mind finds reassurance in structure and clarity. This continuity explains why great communicators across cultures often employ analogies drawn from everyday life. They bridge the abstract with the familiar, guiding the listener gently from known to unknown. When simplicity becomes habitual, communication acquires a special quality of quiet authority. The listener senses that the speaker has nothing to hide, that meaning is offered openly. In a world saturated with information, this transparency becomes rare and valuable. It restores attention because it removes effort. Understanding ceases to feel like work and becomes a natural exchange of awareness. The power of simplicity lies precisely there, in making knowledge feel light, enough to carry, yet strong enough to endure. As this reflection settles, it prepares the way for another dimension of communication, the inner landscape of those who receive it. Simplicity clarifies the message, but understanding depends equally on the listener's perception, attention, and emotional state. To continue exploring how communication truly unfolds, we now turn toward the mind of the listener, the space where every word finds its meaning. Every act of communication begins in one mind and ends in another, yet the path between the two is never identical twice. What a person hears is shaped not only by the sound of the words, but by the entire landscape of their mental state, the level of attention, the emotional tone of the moment, the memories that rise to interpret meaning. To understand communication deeply, one must look beyond the speaker and study the silent partner in the exchange, the listener. The human brain is not a passive receiver. It does not record speech like a microphone capturing sound. Instead, it continuously predicts what comes next, compares those predictions with actual input, and adjusts interpretation in real time. Neuroscientists describe this as predictive coding, a process by which the brain minimizes surprise. When the speaker's rhythm and structure are consistent, these predictions align easily, and comprehension feels smooth. But when speech is erratic or phrasing unpredictable, the brain must work harder, consuming more energy and reducing what psychologists call cognitive bandwidth. The listener might not consciously notice the effort, yet fatigue sets in quietly, and the message begins to fade. Attention plays a central role in this process. At any given moment, the mind can focus sharply on only a narrow stream of information. Visual distractions, internal thoughts, or emotional reactions compete for the same limited resources. Experiments using brain imaging have shown that when a person listens attentively, regions in the auditory cortex synchronize with the amplitude of the speaker's voice. This synchronization falters the moment the listener's attention drifts, much like a radio losing signal. What follows is not simple distraction, of loss of comprehension. Words continue to arrive, yet meaning fails to assemble. In the last few decades, psychologists have begun to describe listening as an active skill rather than a passive state. They use the term active listening to highlight that comprehension depends on continuous internal feedback, small mental nods that confirm understanding, micro adjustments that match rhythm and tone. Skilled listeners mirror not only the emotional content of what they hear, but also its tempo. This synchronization, sometimes called conversational entrainment, creates a sense of connection that both parties experience as empathy. The listener's mind, also carries an emotional filter. Every experience, from childhood onward, shapes how language is interpreted. A phrase intended as neutral may sound critical to someone accustomed to judgment. A calm statement might seem cold to a person seeking warmth. These variations are not errors. They reflect how the brain encodes prior emotional patterns. The amygdala, responsible for assessing threat and relevance, reacts within milliseconds to tone before the cortex even processes meaning. Thus, the emotional state of the listener can alter perception long before logic intervenes. Because of this, effective communication involves awareness of the listener's probable state. Teachers pause after complex ideas to allow integration. Counselors modulate pace and tone to match the client's breathing and emotional rhythm. Leaders pause before answering questions, signaling respect for reflection. These actions adjust the environment in which the listener's brain operates. They lower cognitive load and expand capacity for comprehension. Listening is also influenced by memory. When we hear information, the hippocampus attempts to link it with existing knowledge. If the speaker's message connects smoothly with familiar concepts, understanding feels natural. If it conflicts sharply, the brain hesitates, searching for a suitable framework. This hesitation can appear outwardly as doubt or confusion, though it is simply the mind reconciling old and new data. The process illustrates why analogies and examples are powerful tools. They provide bridges between known and unknown, allowing the listener's memory to organize novelty without threat dotting conversation. Small nonverbal cues indicate how well the listener's mind is aligned. A slight tilt of the head, a consistent eye focus, the timing of nods. These signals show that auditory and motor systems are cooperating. Studies using motion tracking have confirmed that when two people are fully engaged, their micro-movements begin to synchronize. The rhythm of blinking, small shifts in posture, and even fluctuations in pupil size converge. This phenomenon, known as interpersonal synchrony, occurs subconsciously and enhances mutual trust. The listener's mind and body together reflect comprehension long before words confirm it. However, listening is fragile. In modern life, continuous streams of digital input fragment attention into brief intervals. Devices train the brain to expect novelty every few seconds, shortening the span of sustained focus. Research comparing attention patterns from the late 20th century to those of today indicates a significant decline in uninterrupted concentration. This does not mean people are less intelligent. It simply means the environment rewards reactivity over steadiness. For communicators, the implication is clear. Messages must be structured to respect limited focus, offering clarity and rhythm that help the listener's mind remain anchored. Another challenge lies in emotional overload. When communication involves sensitive topics, strong feelings can narrow the listener's capacity to process logic. The prefrontal cortex, which manages reasoning, partially disengages under high emotional arousal. The solution is not to remove emotion, but to pace it. Gradual delivery and moderate tone allow the listener's physiology to stay within what researchers call the window of tolerance, a range in which emotion enhances rather than blocks understanding. Calm communication thus protects the listener's ability to think. In the field of neuroscience, an emerging concept called shared attention network explains how two brains coordinate during conversation. Functional magnetic resonance imaging reveals that when communication succeeds, patterns of neural activation in the speaker and listener mirror each other. The same regions light up almost simultaneously, as though both minds were performing a single cognitive act. This phenomenon illustrates that comprehension is not the transfer of information, but the alignment of mental rhythms. The calmer and clearer the expression, the easier this alignment becomes. The listener's mind also responds to pauses. Silence in communication is not emptiness, but integration. During short gaps between sentences, the auditory system resets and the brain consolidates meaning into long-term storage. When speakers rush without pause, they deprive the listener of these micro-moments of reflection. The result is surface comprehension without retention. Calm pacing, by contrast, mirrors the brain's natural cycles of attention, engagement followed by brief rest. The alternation keeps neural resources fresh and extends. Understanding over longer periods. Another layer of listening involves empathy. Not in the emotional sense of sharing feelings, but in the cognitive ability to model another person's perspective. Psychologists call this theory of mind the capacity to imagine what someone else knows, believes, or intends. Successful communication depends on this faculty in both directions. Speakers anticipate what the listener might understand. Listeners infer what the speaker truly means. When tone and structure are stable, these inferences are accurate. When speech is erratic or contradictory, they fail, leading to misunderstanding. The listener's brain constantly tests hypotheses about intention, adjusting interpretation accordingly. A fascinating finding in recent research shows that listeners remember tone longer than content. Hours after a conversation, people may forget the precise words, but retain the emotional imprint. This is because the amygdala and hippocampus encode emotional context separately from linguistic detail. The memory of calm voice or gentle rhythm persists and influences future interactions with the same person. Communication, therefore, builds not only understanding but emotional history. Each conversation leaves traces in the listener's mind, shaping expectations for the next dot from an educational standpoint. Awareness of the listener's cognitive process helps refine teaching methods. Students retain information better when lessons are structured around attention cycles of approximately 10 to 15 minutes, followed by short pauses or changes of activity. This rhythm matches the brain's natural ultradian patterns, oscillations of alertness that occur several times each hour. Teachers who design sessions in harmony with these patterns create environments where comprehension remains high without forcing concentration beyond its natural limit. The same principle applies to any setting where ideas must travel smoothly between minds. Recognizing the complexity of listening encourages humility in communication. A clear message is only half the equation. The other half is the listener's readiness to receive. External noise, emotional distraction, fatigue, or preconceived ideas can all filter meaning. To reach another person fully, we must account for these invisible barriers, not by demanding attention, but by earning it through calmness and consistency. The listener's mind, when treated with patience, opens naturally. As we conclude this reflection, one insight becomes clear. Understanding depends as much on how we are heard as on what we say. The listener's mind is both the destination and the mirror of every message. Its rhythms, shaped by emotion and attention, determine the fate of words after they leave our lips. In the next step, we will explore how tone, the subtle bridge between emotion and meaning, connects these two worlds. Tone is the quiet structure beneath every word, the element that transforms information into connection. We often assume that meaning lives in vocabulary, yet research in linguistics and neuroscience shows that tone carries more emotional weight than any specific phrase. The way a voice rises, falls, and holds space between sounds communicates intention before logic has time to interpret it. A single sentence can feel caring, impatient, or uncertain, depending entirely on the vibration that carries it. The brain detects tone faster than it recognizes words. Within a fraction of a second after sound reaches the ear, the auditory cortex identifies pitch and rhythm, and the limbic system evaluates safety. Only afterward does the prefrontal cortex begin to analyze content. This sequence explains why we react instinctively to a warm or tense voice, even before understanding the message. Calm tonal patterns lower arousal in the listener's nervous system, while sharp or erratic inflections activate vigilance. Communication, therefore, begins as physiology. The body decides how to feel, and the mind follows. Studies in effective neuroscience confirm that tone alters hormonal balance. Voices with steady rhythm and low variability in pitch correlate with decreased cortisol, the stress hormone. Highly variable or abrupt tones have the opposite effect. These findings align with evolutionary evidence. Long before complex language emerged, vocal tones signaled threat, comfort, or cooperation among early humans. A stable tone implied group safety. Sudden changes warned of danger. The same circuits still function today, quietly translating acoustic patterns into emotion. Linguists describe tone as part of prosody, the melody of speech. Prosody guides comprehension, helping listeners segment sentences and detect emphasis. When tone is even and predictable, comprehension improves because the brain spends less energy deciphering structure. Excessive monotony, however, dulls attention. The balance between variation and stability determines whether speech feels engaging or stressful. This balance can be measured. Acoustic research identifies two main factors: pitch range and temporal pacing. Moderate variation within a slow tempo yields the highest ratings for clarity and comfort. Tone also conveys social information. In many cultures, lower pitch and slower tempo communicate confidence, while higher pitch or faster rhythm conveys excitement or urgency. Listeners subconsciously associate tonal depth with reliability. This association is not universal in meaning, but nearly universal in perception. Biological differences in resonance create consistent impressions across languages. A calm, resonant tone suggests control without aggression, while a tight, elevated tone implies tension. Skilled speakers use this awareness to shape how messages are received without manipulating emotion. In interpersonal relations, tone determines trust. Research on counseling and mediation shows that when professionals maintain gentle, consistent tone, clients disclose more information and show greater cooperation. The same words, delivered with impatience, close communication channels almost immediately. Physiologically, the listener's vagus nerve, responsible for calming the heart and regulating emotion, responds positively to stable frequencies and negatively to abrupt shifts. Tone, in this sense, functions as a biological bridge between two nervous systems. The influence of tone extends into memory. Experiments comparing neutral and emotionally charged speech reveal that people remember tone longer than literal wording. Hours after a conversation, listeners may forget details, yet retain the feeling it produced. The emotional contour encoded by the amygdala shapes future interactions. When tone has conveyed respect or warmth, trust strengthens. When it has expressed irritation, even subtle, the mind recalls caution. Communication, therefore, builds not only knowledge but emotional history. Tone interacts continuously with context. The same intonation that comforts in private conversation may appear informal in a professional setting. Cultural norms define these boundaries, yet across societies the physiological response to consistency remains similar. Voices that stay within moderate intensity allow the listener's brain to predict upcoming patterns, creating psychological safety. That predictability supports the cognitive ease needed for true understanding. Digital communication, stripped of tone, exposes its importance by absence. In text, readers often misinterpret intention because the prosodic cues of voice are missing. Emojis and punctuation attempts to restore what tone provides naturally, emotional contour. Studies in computer-mediated communication show that short voice messages and recorded explanations significantly reduce misunderstandings compared to written text of equal content. The ear recognizes sincerity faster than the eye decodes grammar. In organizational life, tonal awareness improves leadership. Managers who deliver feedback with measured tone foster openness. Employees perceive criticism as constructive when accompanied by warmth and steadiness, even if the content is demanding. Training programs that include vocal modulation exercises report measurable gains in cooperation and motivation. Tone here becomes an instrument of alignment, a way to maintain authority without triggering defense. Education offers parallel evidence. Teachers using consistent volume and mild inflection help students sustain concentration longer. The auditory system, when exposed to rhythmic tone, synchronizes attention waves known as theta oscillations, associated with relaxed focus. This synchronization increases retention and reduces classroom anxiety. In both formal and informal learning, tone shapes how easily information enters long-term memory. Tone's effect is equally relevant in healthcare communication. Patients listening to physicians who speak with calm cadence report lower pain intensity and higher satisfaction. The outcome arises not from placebo, but from neurobiology. Auditory calmness dampens activity in the amygdala and anterior cingulate cortex, regions linked to distress. The therapeutic value of tone lies in its ability to regulate emotion through sound rather than explanation. Technological measurement supports these observations. Acoustic analysis software quantifies micro-irregularities in speech. Lower jitter and shimmer, terms describing frequency and amplitude stability, correspond with voices rated as trustworthy. These parameters correlate with relaxed diaphragmatic breathing and balanced posture. Tone, then, becomes an external indicator of internal equilibrium. Efforts to feign calmness without genuine regulation often fail because the micro-patterns of stress remain detectable to the human ear. Authenticity cannot be simulated fully. It resonates through physiology. One gentle observation emerges here. Tone reveals the state of mind more transparently than words reveal thought. To speak calmly requires internal alignment, a condition where emotion, intention, and expression move in one rhythm. Training the voice to reflect this balance involves both awareness and patience. Voice coaches often begin with breathing control, posture, and pacing before focusing on verbal content. Each of these adjustments influences tone indirectly, reminding us that clarity of sound mirrors clarity of being. From a cognitive standpoint, the listener's brain decodes tone using specialized neurons sensitive to frequency modulation. These neurons cluster in the right superior temporal gyrus, an area responsible for musical perception. The overlap between music and speech processing suggests why tone communicates emotion universally. The same neural circuits that interpret melody also interpret prosody, meaning that the emotional language of sound precedes linguistic diversity. This shared biology explains cross-cultural recognition of comfort or anger in voices. Even without shared vocabulary. When tone and meaning align, communication becomes effortless. When they diverge, misunderstanding grows silently. People may agree on facts, yet feel uneasy if tonal cues contradict verbal assurance. That is why diplomats, negotiators, and therapists train to monitor tone continuously, adjusting not for effect, but for harmony. The goal is not performance, but authenticity sustained across tension. As we approach the close of this reflection, it becomes clear that tone serves as the connective tissue of understanding. It binds words to emotion, thought to physiology, and individuals to each other. Without tone, language would be a series of symbols. With tone, it becomes a living exchange. The next layer of this exploration moves from sound to its absence, from vibration to stillness. We turn now to the hidden role of silence, the pauses that shape rhythm, grant weight to words, and allow communication to breathe. Silence in human communication is not an interruption, but a structural element. Each pause shapes how language is perceived, processed, and remembered. Without intervals of quiet, speech becomes a stream without contour, difficult for the brain to segment and interpret. Researchers in cognitive science and linguistics agree that understanding relies on rhythm, and rhythm requires silence. The human auditory system processes information in discrete units lasting only a few hundred milliseconds. Between these bursts of perception, the brain pauses momentarily, integrating sound into meaning. This pattern, called temporal chunking, is universal. When a speaker ignores these natural intervals and speaks continuously, the listener's neural activity loses synchrony with the speech signal. Comprehension declines, memory weakens, and fatigue rises. In contrast, when speech includes pauses every few seconds, neural oscillations in both brains align more precisely, improving attention and recall. Linguists describe these pauses as prosodic boundaries, moments that mark grammatical and emotional transitions. Their duration varies across languages, yet their cognitive function remains constant. A short pause indicates continuity. A slightly longer one signals completion of thought. Experiments show that listeners unconsciously anticipate these pauses, adjusting breathing and attention in synchrony. In this sense, silence provides structure to meaning, much as punctuation organizes writing. From the standpoint of neuroscience, silence also triggers distinct brain activity. Functional imaging studies reveal that brief, quiet periods activate the default mode network, the system responsible for connecting new information to stored experience. During these pauses, the hippocampus consolidates memory traces, allowing short-term information to integrate into long-term knowledge. Continuous verbal input prevents this process, as the sensory system stays occupied. Silence gives the mind time to encode, link, and stabilize learning. The physiological dimension of silence is equally significant. When vocal input ceases, the listener's body shifts from sympathetic activation to parasympathetic regulation. Heart rate slows slightly, and the vagus nerve restores balance. This reaction explains why short pauses reduce anxiety, even in challenging discussions. Silence functions as an automatic reset, lowering physiological arousal so that thought can continue. It is not merely emotional. It is biological conservation. In interpersonal contexts, silence communicates as much as words. It may signal respect, contemplation, agreement, or discomfort, depending on timing and cultural norms. Anthropologists studying conversational gaps across societies found that Japanese speakers often wait more than 1 full second before replying, while English speakers fill silence after less than half that time. These cultural rhythms shape how mutual understanding is achieved. What remains constant is the listener's reliance on pause to interpret intent. Silence guides expectation. Educational research provides measurable evidence of silence's cognitive role. Students given a few seconds of quiet after complex explanations perform better on recall tests. The short delay allows integration and reduces cognitive load. Similar effects occur in professional settings. Negotiators who tolerate silence after asking a question receive longer and more thoughtful responses. Counselors who maintain quiet moments during sessions encourage deeper reflection. In each case, silence signals patience and attentiveness, inviting participation rather than demanding it. Auditory physiology adds another layer of explanation. The ear adapts rapidly to continuous sound, reducing sensitivity over time. When sound stops, this adaptation resets, restoring clarity for subsequent input. This mechanism, known as auditory contrast enhancement, shows that silence literally refreshes perception. A few seconds of quiet recalibrate hearing, enabling listeners to perceive tone and nuance with greater precision once speech resumes. Technological communication has changed our relationship with silence. Instant messaging and video calls minimize natural pauses, rewarding quick reaction over reflection. Yet even in digital media, strategic silence, a delayed response, a brief pause before replying, conveys thoughtfulness and respect. Studies in online behavior show that users interpret slightly slower replies as more deliberate and sincere, as long as the delay is proportional to context. The principle remains the same. Silence preserves depth. From a psychological viewpoint, silence supports emotional regulation. During intense discussion, moments of quiet give the prefrontal cortex time to re-engage after emotional activation. This mechanism, sometimes called effective pacing, prevents impulsive reaction. The short gap allows the brain's reasoning centers to resume control before the conversation escalates. This is why trained mediators and therapists often emphasize pause as a method of maintaining clarity. Under stress. In group communication, silence influences collective rhythm. Teams that include short reflective breaks during meetings demonstrate higher creativity and decision accuracy. These pauses allow participants to integrate diverse inputs rather than competing for verbal space. Neuroscientists link this to synchronization of alpha waves across multiple brains, a physiological marker of shared focus. Silence, in this context, becomes social coordination rather than absence. There is also a moral dimension. In a world of constant expression, allowing silence signals humility, the recognition that listening completes the act of speaking. It acknowledges that understanding grows in the space between voices. A single quiet moment can transform the tone of dialogue, replacing competition with curiosity. To describe silence is to describe structure. It defines beginnings and endings, sets pace, and provides recovery. A useful metaphor might be the blank margin around a printed page. Without it, reading would be impossible, yet it contains no words. Silence functions the same way, outlining the boundaries of thought so that meaning can breathe within them. Learning to use silence consciously requires practice. Communication trainers often teach speakers to count to 2 after delivering a key point, allowing its significance to settle. The technique increases perceived confidence and attentiveness. It also aligns with natural brain rhythms most listeners need, roughly that duration to integrate new information before their attention resets. In everyday interaction, simply waiting a little longer before replying often improves the quality of exchange more effectively than any rhetorical strategy. Ultimately, silence acts as the subtle measure of mutual respect. It allows listening, reflection, and emotional equilibrium. Through silence, the rhythm of dialogue maintains coherence. Without it, understanding collapses under the weight of speed. The calm science of communication, therefore, treats silence not as an accessory, but as an essential variable, a measurable, physiological, and psychological tool for clarity. As this reflection concludes, the pattern beneath communication becomes visible. Words and pauses alternate like steps in a shared movement. Each moment of stillness gives shape to the sound that follows. In the next exploration, we will examine this pattern more closely, how rhythm itself organizes meaning, guiding the listener through cycles of focus and rest that form the true cadence of understanding. Every exchange of words unfolds within a rhythm, a steady alternation of speaking and listening, of expression and reflection. This rhythm is not simply a matter of habit or culture. It is grounded in the biology of perception. The human brain does not receive information continuously. It operates in pulses, cycles of attention, and processing that shape how meaning is constructed. When speech aligns with these natural cycles, comprehension feels effortless. When it clashes, the mind struggles to keep pace. Neuroscientists studying auditory cognition describe communication as a synchronization between two oscillating systems, the brain of the speaker and the brain of the listener. The electrical activity in the auditory cortex fluctuates in rhythmic patterns known as neural oscillations. These cycles occur several times per second, dividing the flow of sound into manageable units. When a speaker maintains a consistent pace and clear pauses, the listener's brain waves align with the temporal structure of the voice. This alignment, called neural entrainment, supports memory and comprehension. In this sense, understanding is less a static event and more a coordinated rhythm between minds. Linguistics provides another perspective. Speech is naturally organized into syllables, phrases, and sentences that repeat with predictable timing. The average phrase lasts about 2 to 3 seconds, roughly matching the typical breathing cycle. Languages across the world follow this rhythm despite vast differences in grammar or melody. Even sign languages exhibit similar temporal patterns. Gestures cluster into segments of comparable duration. This universality suggests that rhythm is an organizing principle of human communication itself, a biological constant that transcends culture. Psycholinguistic experiments confirm that comprehension improves when speech mirrors these natural intervals. In studies where participants listened to sentences read at varying tempos, moderate rhythm, not too fast, not too slow, consistently produced the highest understanding and recall. When speech accelerated beyond the brain's optimal window, errors in perception increased sharply. This window, sometimes referred to as the temporal integration period, represents the span of time the brain can hold and process one coherent unit of sound. Speech delivered within this range feels balanced. Speech outside it feels confusing. Understanding also depends on repetition and predictability, two core elements of rhythm. The brain's auditory system is designed to detect patterns. When a phrase or tone repeats with slight variation, it triggers a sense of familiarity that facilitates learning. Researchers studying language acquisition in infants discovered that predictable rhythmic patterns help children distinguish words long before they grasp meaning. Adults, too, rely on rhythm for structure. Repeated verbal patterns act as anchors that stabilize attention. Teachers, public speakers, and storytellers use this instinctively. Varying pitch and timing to create cycles of tension and release that sustain comprehension. At the physiological level, rhythm links directly to attention. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for managing focus, works in coordination with the thalamus, which acts as a timing regulator. Together, they form a circuit that synchronizes perception with external rhythm. When speech maintains a steady tempo, this circuit functions efficiently, allowing attention to flow without strain. Irregular or chaotic pacing forces the brain to reset repeatedly, consuming additional energy and reducing understanding. This is why calm, evenly paced speech feels easier to follow. It matches the rhythm of neural timing. Emotion also influences this process. Rhythm is not purely mechanical. It carries effective meaning. The pacing of speech communicates mood, intention, and sincerity. Rapid, uneven rhythm suggests urgency or anxiety. A slower, measured pace conveys control and openness. Listeners detect these signals instinctively through changes in temporal patterning. Studies in communication psychology show that moderate rhythm not only improves comprehension, but also increases perceived empathy. The human nervous system responds favorably to rhythm that mirrors calm physiological states, such as steady breathing and consistent heart rate. In group communication, rhythm becomes collective. When people engage in dialogue or shared activity, their body rhythms, heart rate, gestures, even micro-movements begin to synchronize. This phenomenon, known as interpersonal entrainment, reinforces cooperation. Conversations that flow naturally exhibit turn-taking intervals of predictable duration. When these intervals are disrupted, for example, by interruptions or long monologues, coordination weakens. The conversation loses its balance, and participants report lower satisfaction. Maintaining rhythm, then, is not only cognitive but social. It sustains the feeling of connection. Education and music therapy both demonstrate the power of rhythm to stabilize attention. Students listening to lectures delivered in rhythmic speech retain information longer than those exposed to monotone or irregular delivery. In rehabilitation contexts, rhythmic auditory cues help patients recovering from neurological injury to rebuild timing in speech and movement. The brain's ability to align with external rhythm is so fundamental that it persists even after partial damage to language centers. This resilience underscores that rhythm is one of the most basic organizing forces of communication. Silence, as explored previously, is part of this rhythm. It marks transitions and allows the brain to rest before the next wave of input. In measured communication, moments of quiet are distributed like rests in a musical score, not empty, but functional. They define contour and create predictability. Research on cognitive load shows that these brief pauses prevent saturation of working memory, enabling continuous learning. Without them, rhythm collapses into noise, and comprehension decays. A single gentle metaphor captures this principle. Communication resembles the steady turning of gears within a watch. Each movement depends on timing. Each pause between rotations prevents friction. When the rhythm holds, the mechanism runs smoothly, and meaning advances without resistance. This is the physics of understanding, precise, balanced, and continuous. The science of attention adds further nuance. Human focus operates in cycles lasting roughly 10 to 15 seconds, during which processing efficiency peaks before declining. Skilled communicators intuitively divide their message into units of similar length, introducing slight pauses at the natural drop of attention. These cycles mirror ultradian patterns observed across many biological systems, from heartbeat to neural oscillation. Rhythm, in this view, is the bridge between cognition and physiology, ensuring that information aligns with the body's natural pace. Cultural studies show that rhythm influences perception of trust as well. In recorded interviews analyzed by communication researchers, speakers whose rhythm remained consistent throughout discussion were rated as more credible and emotionally stable. Irregular rhythm, even without overt anxiety, reduced perceived reliability. The result indicates that listeners equate rhythmic balance with authenticity, a sign that the speaker's mind is organized and transparent. from a developmental standpoint. Rhythm is among the earliest communicative tools humans acquire. Infants recognize the cadence of their mother's voice before birth. They respond to rhythmic patterns with relaxation or excitement, laying the foundation for future language learning. As adults, we continue to rely on these rhythmic cues unconsciously. A voice that follows a steady pattern signals coherence and safety, enabling listeners to focus on meaning rather than form. The rhythm of understanding extends beyond speech into reading and writing. Well-structured text contains natural pauses through punctuation and paragraphing, guiding the reader's internal rhythm. Cognitive ergonomics shows that reading speed and comprehension improve when sentence length and punctuation mirror spoken cadence. In both oral and written forms, rhythm defines accessibility. Ultimately, rhythm transforms communication from transmission into collaboration. It coordinates brain, body, and emotion in shared timing. This shared tempo allows ideas to move from one consciousness to another without distortion. When rhythm breaks, misunderstanding arises, not because of lack of intelligence, but because timing has fallen out of sync. As this reflection closes, it becomes clear that understanding depends as much on timing as on content. The cadence of speech, the balance of pause and flow, the alignment of cycles between minds, all form the architecture of comprehension. From this rhythmic foundation arises a deeper layer still, the invisible weight carried by purpose and sincerity. In the next exploration, we will turn to that dimension, the weight of intention that gives rhythm and language their direction. Every word carries more than sound. Beneath its surface lies an invisible force, intention. It is the silent direction that determines how language moves through the world. Two people may use identical words, yet the meaning they transmit differs completely, shaped by the purpose that guides their voice. In communication, intention functions like gravity. It gives weight to speech, anchors attention, and pulls understanding toward authenticity. Linguists often describe intention as illocutionary, force, the speaker's true aim behind the words. It may inform, request, comfort, or persuade. The listener's brain decodes this intention through subtle cues in tone, rhythm, and choice of phrasing. Neurolinguistic studies show that comprehension involves both literal processing and an additional, inferential layer where the listener predicts what the speaker intends to achieve. This prediction occurs within milliseconds before conscious reasoning. In this way, intention becomes part of the signal itself, not an afterthought. From a cognitive perspective, intention shapes clarity. When the purpose of communication is defined before speech begins, the brain organizes information more efficiently. Psychologists studying verbal working memory note that intention provides a hierarchy for attention. It tells the mind which details are essential and which are secondary. Without it, language drifts, producing words that may sound articulate but lack coherence. Experiments in public speaking demonstrate that listeners rate intentional speech, even if slower or simpler, as more convincing than complex language without a clear goal. The difference lies not in vocabulary, but in focus. Intention also governs perception of sincerity. The human nervous system is remarkably sensitive to inconsistency between internal state and external expression. When a person's words diverge from their emotional reality, small discrepancies in tone, facial movement, and pacing appear. Listeners detect these micro mismatches instinctively, even without realizing it. This phenomenon, called emotional leakage, explains why false flattery or rehearsed empathy often feels uncomfortable. Authentic intention, on the other hand, aligns physiological signals. Voice, gaze, and gesture synchronize, creating coherence that the listener interprets as honesty. Neuroscientists have identified brain regions involved in interpreting intention, particularly the temporoparietal junction and the medial prefrontal cortex. These areas belong to the network responsible for what psychologists call theory of mind, the ability to infer the mental states of others. When communication is sincere and clear, these regions activate smoothly, supporting empathy and understanding. When the message appears deceptive or ambiguous, additional effort is required and activation patterns become fragmented. The cognitive cost of uncertainty illustrates how essential perceived intention is to comprehension. Intention extends beyond interpersonal conversation into professional and public communication. In leadership, for instance, transparent purpose amplifies trust. Employees respond more strongly to messages that express genuine commitment to shared values than to abstract motivational language. Researchers in organizational psychology found that when leaders communicated strategic goals along with their underlying personal rationale, engagement increased measurably. The alignment between purpose and message created what they called meaning coherence, a resonance between individual and collective intention. Education follows the same pattern. Teachers who express clear intention behind each lesson, explaining not only what is being taught, but why, enhance retention and motivation. The reason is psychological. Intention provides context. Learners integrate new knowledge more effectively when they understand its purpose. In this way, intention transforms instruction into shared discovery rather than transmission of data. In medical and counseling environments, intention influences outcome as well. Studies on the placebo effect demonstrate that patients benefit not only from treatment, but from the perceived intention of care. A doctor's or therapist's calm, presence, and genuine focus can trigger measurable physiological improvements, lowering stress markers and pain perception. The underlying mechanism involves activation of the prefrontal cortex, which interprets intention as social safety. This shows that the emotional direction behind words is biologically consequential, not symbolic. Cultural linguistics also highlights intention as the foundation of politeness and respect. In some languages, formality encodes intention directly. The difference between casual and honorific speech signals relational attitude. In others, intention must be inferred from tone and timing. Across cultures, miscommunication often arises when form and intent diverge. Polite phrasing delivered with irritation, or blunt honesty spoken with warmth. The global pattern remains consistent. People forgive awkward form more readily than unclear or insincere intention. On a neural level, speaking with intention stabilizes vocal rhythm and breath. When a communicator focuses on purpose rather than self-consciousness, the body relaxes into natural cadence. Speech therapists use this principle to treat stuttering or performance anxiety, teaching clients to redirect attention from mechanics of delivery to meaning. This shift activates broader motor coordination and reduces stress-driven constriction of muscles. Intention, once clarified, brings physiological order to communication. One gentle metaphor captures the phenomenon. Intention is the compass of language. It does not move the ship by itself, but it determines where the current leads. Without direction, even strong words drift in circles. With it, the simplest phrase reaches its destination. This image reflects measurable truth. Direction stabilizes both emotion and cognition. Research in emotional intelligence connects intention with empathy. Genuine intention to understand or support another person activates mirror neurons in the inferior frontal gyrus, aligning internal emotional states. This alignment builds trust faster than any rhetorical technique. Artificial displays of concern, though structurally correct, fail to trigger the same neural resonance because the underlying motivation is absent. Communication grounded in authentic intent produces physiological harmony between speaker and listener, a state often described as rapport. Intention also defines ethical communication. In modern information environments saturated with persuasion and manipulation, distinguishing message from motive becomes increasingly difficult. Scholars of media psychology warn that audiences evaluate credibility largely through perceived integrity of intention. Transparent motives enhance credibility even when opinions differ. Hidden agendas, once exposed, permanently damage trust. Thus, the sustainability of any message depends not only on accuracy, but on honesty of purpose, got in everyday conversation. Clarifying intention prevents misunderstanding. A simple preface such as, "I want to help you understand this," or "I'm sharing this because I care," frames perception and reduces defensive response. This small act guides the listener's brain toward cooperative interpretation rather than threat detection. Over time, consistent expression of positive intention strengthens relational resilience. People remember how conversations made them feel long after they forget specific words. From a developmental standpoint, awareness of intention matures gradually. Young children often speak sincerely, but without full understanding of impact. Adults, through experience, learn to align thought, emotion, and expression. This alignment marks communicative maturity. The most skilled communicators maintain conscious awareness of why they are speaking at every moment, to inform, to reassure, to question, or to connect. Purpose becomes the quiet center around which language organizes itself. Before this reflection draws to a close, it is useful to return to the foundation. Intention transforms sound into meaning. It provides emotional stability, cognitive focus, and ethical transparency. Without it, communication becomes mechanical. With it, even simple language acquires depth. As we move forward, the next layer of understanding turns outward, from inner purpose to active reception. If intention gives direction to speech, then listening gives it completion. The following exploration examines this second half of communication, how listening itself becomes an act of kindness, shaping connection through presence rather than control. In every conversation, one force determines whether communication becomes connection or remains noise: the quality of listening. Listening may appear passive, but science describes it as one of the most active cognitive processes the brain performs. It requires attention, interpretation, empathy, and regulation of emotion. When done consciously, listening becomes a quiet form of generosity, an act of kindness that gives space for another person's thoughts to exist fully before our own intervene. Neuroscientific research shows that listening engages widespread brain networks. The auditory cortex decodes sound. The temporal lobes interpret meaning. The prefrontal cortex maintains attention and inhibition, preventing premature reaction. At the same time, mirror neuron systems simulate the speaker's emotional state, allowing empathy to arise. The process demands coordination across billions of neurons, each firing in carefully timed sequences. Listening, therefore, is not stillness, but organized complexity, a symphony of fixity, perception, and regulation, working toward understanding. Average human brain can process speech at a rate nearly 3 times faster than the average person speaks. This gap between hearing speed and speaking speed creates temptation to fill the unused time with inner commentary, judgment, or distraction. Skilled listeners resist that impulse. They use this surplus mental capacity to track emotional subtext, nonverbal cues, and coherence of meaning. Psychologists describe this discipline as cognitive empathy, staying mentally present not to respond, but to understand. Physiological measurements confirm that deep listening alters both the listener's and the speaker's body states. Heart rate, pupil size, and galvanic skin response show subtle synchronization during attentive interaction. This phenomenon, known as physiological co-regulation, suggests that empathy is not metaphorical, it is measurable. When one person listens with calm presence, a speaker's stress markers decrease, and their narrative becomes more coherent. In this way, kindness in listening produces tangible biological effects, not in professional contexts, such as counseling or mediation. This principle forms the foundation of effectiveness. Therapists trained in reflective listening, repeating and clarifying what clients express, report higher trust and faster emotional stabilization in sessions. The act of being heard activates the brain's reward circuitry, particularly the ventral striatum, releasing dopamine and creating a sense of validation. Feeling understood satisfies the same neural pathways that process social belonging. This explains why attentive silence can comfort as deeply as verbal reassurance. Cultural anthropology reveals that listening habits differ widely across societies, but the underlying psychology remains constant. In some cultures, pauses and minimal responses indicate respect. In others, active verbal affirmation signals engagement. Regardless of form, the listener's underlying intention, openness without judgment, defines whether communication succeeds. When that intention falters, misunderstandings multiply, even among people who share language and background. In education, the role of listening extends beyond comprehension to learning itself. Teachers who model attentive listening create classrooms with higher participation and lower anxiety. Neuroscientists studying classroom dynamics note that students mirror the teacher's attentional patterns. When the instructor listens carefully to a question, students' neural markers of focus rise collectively. Listening, in this sense, is contagious. It sets a rhythm of attention that the group unconsciously follows. Listening also influences memory. Information received while a listener feels emotionally acknowledged is encoded more effectively in the hippocampus. The sense of being heard creates safety, which reduces cortisol levels and enhances consolidation of learning. This relationship between emotion and cognition shows why communication that lacks empathy often fails to educate or persuade. The listener's brain must feel secure before it can fully process information. A gentle metaphor may help describe this process. Listening is the still surface of a lake that reflects whatever is placed before it. Disturb the surface with impatience, and the reflection blurs. Remain calm, and it reveals detail with precision. The metaphor aligns with neurophysiology. When the listener's body remains regulated, sensory systems function optimally, capturing subtleties of tone, rhythm, and meaning. From a social perspective, listening maintains cohesion within groups. Studies in organizational behavior find that teams where members feel heard display higher trust and creativity. In contrast, environments dominated by rapid interruption or competition for speaking time show increased stress and lower innovation. The difference lies not in resources or skill, but in psychological safety, the collective belief that one's voice will be respected. Deep listening establishes that safety WORDLESSLY in everyday life. Listening often determines the emotional direction of relationships. Conflicts rarely escalate because of disagreement alone. They escalate because one or both sides feel unheard. Research on marital communication shows that during disputes, physiological arousal in partners declines sharply when one person practices active listening, maintaining eye contact, paraphrasing meaning, and avoiding premature defense. The effect persists even when no solution is reached. The biological message of attentive presence, "You are safe enough to speak," reduces threat response and restores dialogue. Technological mediation has complicated this ancient skill. Digital interaction fragments attention, replacing the sensory cues of conversation with text and image. Without tone or rhythm, listeners must infer emotion through limited signals, increasing risk of misinterpretation. Communication scientists argue that in this environment, deliberate listening requires conscious design, slower reading, pauses before responding, and restraint from reflexive reaction. In effect, we must rebuild the conditions of attentiveness once created, naturally by physical presence. Listening as kindness also involves recognizing limits. Cognitive fatigue reduces accuracy of perception. Extended exposure to complex or emotional conversation taxes, working memory and empathy circuits alike. Professional listeners, therapists, mediators, educators, practice structured pauses to restore focus. These breaks are not avoidance, but maintenance, protecting the clarity that true listening demands. The principle applies broadly. Silence and rest sustain attention more effectively than constant effort. One striking aspect of listening is that it changes the listener as much as the speaker. When we hold space for another person's thoughts without interference, neural plasticity allows subtle reshaping of our own perspectives. Exposure to diverse voices expands interpretive frameworks in the brain's semantic networks, literally increasing mental flexibility. This biological reciprocity reveals listening as a shared act of growth rather than service. Listening also has ethical dimensions. In public discourse, where polarization dominates, genuine attention to differing views can reduce hostility. Experiments in political psychology show that brief sessions of structured listening, without rebuttal, only paraphrasing and acknowledgement, significantly decrease negative bias between opposing groups. These effects endure for weeks, suggesting that empathy through listening reshapes perception at both individual and collective scales. To listen as an act of kindness is therefore to apply science in service of humanity. It integrates physiology, emotion, and ethics into a single behavior. It slows the pace of conversation to match the mind's capacity for respect. It transforms dialogue from competition into collaboration, where understanding itself becomes the shared goal. As this reflection settles, the next layer of communication returns once more to language, to the words themselves, and how they carry breadth and vitality when shaped by empathy and intention. In the next exploration, we will look at words that breathe, how vocabulary and phrasing influence the emotional air of conversation, giving speech both clarity and calm resonance. Language is more than vocabulary. It is a living system shaped by rhythm, emotion, and intention. Words, though composed of sound and meaning, also carry a form of energy, not mystical, but physiological. They shape breathing, regulate the nervous system, and influence how thoughts form in both speaker and listener. When chosen carefully, words seem to breathe. They allow space for reflection and connection, instead of constriction and haste. Linguists and cognitive scientists describe language as an interface between inner experience and external reality. Words act as compression tools for thought, packaging complex feelings into symbols that can travel between minds. Yet the efficiency of this transfer depends on the structure of the words themselves. Short, concrete language is processed faster by the brain's semantic networks. Overly abstract or technical phrasing requires additional decoding time. Functional magnetic resonance imaging studies reveal that clear, image-based words activate sensory areas, visual, auditory, and motor, creating richer understanding. Ambiguous or redundant terms, by contrast, demand greater prefrontal effort, which can lead to fatigue. Psycholinguistic experiments show that people comprehend speech more easily when sentences follow natural prosodic rhythm. In English and many other languages, this rhythm mirrors a breathing cycle of roughly 2 to 3 seconds. Phrases that exceed this interval cause listeners to unconsciously hold their breath, triggering mild physiological tension. Speakers who structure language in segments matching natural respiration promote calm comprehension. This is why public speakers trained in rhetoric often plan sentences that flow with human breathing rather than grammatical length. The emotional weight of words also depends on their sound. Phonetics research demonstrates that vowels with open articulation, such as A or O, evoke warmth and openness, while closed vowels like I and E suggest sharpness or precision. These associations are not purely cultural. They stem from embodied resonance. The vocal tract and the ear share harmonic properties, and certain frequencies align more easily with relaxation patterns in the autonomic nervous system. In effect, the sound of a word can reinforce or contradict its meaning, shaping how the listener feels even before comprehension occurs. This interplay of sound and sense forms what linguists call phonosemantics, a study of how phonetic form influences emotional response. Marketers and poets have long intuited this principle. Softer consonants and longer vowels convey gentleness, while abrupt stops create urgency. When language aims to calm or persuade, euphony matters as much as accuracy. The choice between help and assist, or between end and conclude, may appear trivial, yet each carries a different acoustic and emotional footprint. Neuroscience adds another dimension. When a person hears emotionally charged words, the amygdala and hippocampus activate alongside auditory regions. These structures determine whether the information will be stored as neutral data or as meaningful experience. Gentle, compassionate language produces weaker amygdala activation and stronger connectivity with regions linked to empathy. Harsh or judgmental language triggers stress responses, narrowing perception. Over time, repeated exposure to negative wording increases baseline cortisol levels, demonstrating that words literally shape biology. In therapeutic and educational settings, this effect becomes visible. Teachers and counselors who use language emphasizing possibility rather than deficit, phrases like "you can build on," "this" instead of "you failed at this," promote measurable improvement in motivation and learning outcomes. The reframing shifts the listener's neurochemistry from threat to curiosity. Even subtle differences in tone, such as replacing should with could, can lower resistance. Words that breathe leave space for agency. They invite rather than demand. A single gentle metaphor captures the essence. Words are like small doors. Some close quickly, shutting down exploration. Others open smoothly, allowing thought to enter and wander. The difference lies in structure, not decoration. Words that breathe open space. Words that constrict end it. This distinction aligns with linguistic pragmatics, the study of how context determines meaning. When a speaker leaves interpretive room through tentative phrasing, balanced rhythm, or transparent motivation, listeners feel safe to participate. In scientific communication, clarity functions as the oxygen of understanding. Researchers analyzing public engagement find that comprehension decreases exponentially with each additional layer of technical jargon. Translating complexity into plain language does not reduce precision. it reveals it. The philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein once wrote that the limits of language are the limits of thought. Modern cognitive science confirms this. Vocabulary defines conceptual possibility. When words breathe, when they remain open and flexible, thinking follows. The same pattern. Sociolinguists adds that word choice reflects social identity and power. Inclusive language practices, now widely studied, show that people's physiological comfort improves when they hear terms that recognize rather than exclude them. The body responds with reduced heart rate and increased oxytocin, the hormone linked to trust. Respectful wording is not only moral courtesy, but neurological cooperation. It signals that the social environment is safe, allowing the brain to devote resources to comprehension rather than defense. The rhythm of language also determines retention. Information delivered in balanced cadence, alternating between longer and shorter sentences, activates predictive processing in the auditory cortex. The brain anticipates pattern, rewards accuracy of prediction with dopamine, and thus encodes memory more deeply. This mechanism explains why poetry and well-structured speeches remain memorable for decades. Their rhythm mirrors natural cognitive expectation, making meaning feel inevitable. In interpersonal conversation, choosing words that breathe fosters emotional alignment. Phrases that validate rather than evaluate create cooperative resonance. Communication researchers describe this as effective attunement, matching language to emotional context without imitation. For instance, responding to frustration with acknowledgement. That sounds difficult, instead of instruction. You should calm down. Activates empathy circuits and restores equilibrium. Such phrasing respects autonomy while maintaining connection. Technological communication challenges these principles. Written text lacks vocal nuance, so the rhythm and emotional softness must be conveyed through structure and punctuation. Short paragraphs, deliberate spacing, and moderate tempo in writing mimic the flow of spoken calm. Experiments in digital correspondence reveal that messages formatted with natural breaks and positive framing increase cooperation by nearly 1/3 compared with compressed, directive language. The lesson remains consistent. Readability is a form of kindness in the realm of leadership and public discourse. Linguistic choices influence collective emotion. Political speeches that rely on inclusive pronouns, like we and our, elicit greater trust than those dominated by I or you. The pronouns subtly shape perception of shared identity. Similarly, language that emphasizes process over outcome, we are working toward instead of we must achieve, sustains motivation under uncertainty. When words breathe, they adapt. When they stiffen, they fracture under stress. Ultimately, words that breathe embody balance, precision without rigidity, emotion without excess. They recognize that clarity is not merely the absence of confusion, but the presence of space. Each pause, each well-chosen phrase allows thought to circulate freely between minds. Communication grounded in such language reduces friction, preserves dignity, and supports cognitive ease. As this reflection draws to a close, the next dimension of effective communication emerges naturally. If words can breathe, they can also become quiet. Their strength often increases when they are fewer, when simplicity replaces elaboration. In the next exploration, we will look at this principle, when less becomes more, and examine how restraint, clarity, and deliberate economy of expression enhance both meaning and trust. Communication often rewards clarity over complexity. Yet in many contexts, people equate depth with detail, assuming that more words, data, or explanation will strengthen their message. Paradoxically, research across linguistics, psychology, And cognitive science shows the opposite. As verbal density increases, comprehension and retention decline. The human brain, designed to process information efficiently, performs best when the signal is clean and the meaning is direct. The art of saying less is not reduction, it is refinement. Cognitive load theory provides a foundation for this understanding. Working memory, the mental workspace that temporarily holds information, has a limited capacity. Experiments conducted since the mid-20th century indicate that the average person can retain roughly 7 discrete units of information at one time. When communication exceeds that limit, the brain begins discarding or distorting data. Concise messages respect this biological boundary. They present one clear idea at a time, allowing understanding to consolidate before new input arrives. In linguistic terms, brevity supports what scholars call processing fluency, the ease with which information moves through the perceptual and cognitive systems. Messages that are easy to process are perceived as more credible, even when their content is identical to more complex versions. Psychologists have demonstrated this repeatedly. Statements written in plain language are judged truer, more intelligent, and more ethical than those using unnecessary technical vocabulary. The brain, preferring efficiency, interprets fluency as honesty. Neuroscience confirms that comprehension and trust share neural pathways. Both activate the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, a region integrating emotional and rational evaluation. When the brain encounters simple, structured speech, activity in this area remains steady. When overwhelmed by dense phrasing, it becomes erratic, reflecting uncertainty. The result is not just confusion, but subtle resistance. Listeners instinctively withdraw from messages that feel difficult to parse, even if content is accurate. In communication training, this principle appears as the clarity curve. As message length increases, effectiveness rises at first. More context improves understanding, but beyond a certain point, performance declines sharply. The exact threshold varies with topic and audience, yet the curve always bends downward eventually. The implication is universal. Every additional word should justify its presence. When fewer words achieve the same function, reduction becomes a form of precision. This does not mean communication should be simplistic. Complexity can coexist with clarity when ideas are layered sequentially rather than crowded simultaneously. Skilled communicators use hierarchical structure, main idea first, and gradual elaboration. Such design aligns with how memory encodes information in patterns of association rather than continuous streams. Summaries at key intervals reinforce retention. The technique mirrors natural rhythm, alternating between density and pause, giving listeners time to integrate meaning. Minimalist communication also benefits from what cognitive scientists call predictive coding. The brain constantly anticipates the next unit of information. When speech or writing follows logical progression, predictive accuracy remains high, saving cognitive energy. Excessive elaboration disrupts this mechanism. The listener must rebuild expectations repeatedly. Clarity, therefore, is not mere aesthetic simplicity, but neurological efficiency. Cultural studies show that societies with high context communication, those relying heavily on shared understanding, often value brevity even more. In Japanese or Finnish discourse, silence and understatement communicate depth and respect. Western communication traditions, emphasizing explicit reasoning, sometimes mistake brevity for superficiality. Yet across cultures, the most trusted communicators are those who balance restraint with warmth, conveying meaning without saturation. From an emotional standpoint, fewer words invite reflection. When a message ends before the listener's attention fades, it creates space for interpretation. This psychological gap enhances engagement. The listener becomes an active participant, completing meaning internally. Neuroscientists studying storytelling call this the closure effect. When the mind fills a small informational void, retention increases. The same principle applies in dialogue. A concise statement lingers longer than a complete explanation. Marketing and design industries quantify this effect through the concept of signal-to-noise ratio. Each additional element that does not add meaning reduces clarity. The same holds for language. Redundant adjectives, repeated arguments, or lengthy transitions dilute emphasis. When unnecessary words are removed, what remains gains proportionate strength. This principle reflects one of communication's paradoxes. Subtraction amplifies impact. A single gentle metaphor illustrates it clearly. Words resemble light passing through air. Too dense a medium, and brightness fades. Too thin, and definition disappears. The goal is transparency, where meaning travels unimpeded. In both optics and communication, clarity emerges not from excess, but from balance. Scientific writing offers an instructive example. Journals that enforce strict length limits often produce more influential articles. Authors, compelled to condense arguments, preserve only essential evidence. Readers report higher understanding and confidence in findings. The pattern extends to public speaking, where presentations under 10 minutes maintain far greater retention than those exceeding 20. Conciseness, by synchronizing with human attention spans, respects biology as much as aesthetics. Education research supports this alignment. Students recall core concepts more effectively when instructors limit each session to one primary objective. When multiple ideas compete for focus, memory fragments. Teachers trained in micro-lecturing, delivering short, clear segments followed by pause or discussion, achieve better outcomes. The underlying mechanism is attention cycling. The brain operates optimally in bursts of focus, lasting roughly 15 minutes, separated by intervals of rest. This rhythm, observed across cognitive domains, favors concise delivery. Minimalist communication also cultivates emotional credibility. Excessive detail may appear defensive or manipulative, while concise statements convey confidence. Linguistic analysis of political speeches shows that audiences interpret succinct phrasing as a sign of integrity. The absence of ornament suggests that the speaker trusts both the message and the audience's ability to understand it. In psychological terms, brevity signals respect. Technology amplifies the importance of this principle. In digital communication, where information competes for limited attention, brevity becomes survival. Studies of online reading behavior reveal that most users disengage after less than 20 seconds of text without clear structure. Visual clarity and short sentences mirror the way the eye and brain scan digital content, in rhythmic bursts rather than continuous flow. Yet even in this rapid medium, reduction must maintain coherence. Simplicity without structure produces emptiness. The goal remains density of meaning with an economy of form. Beyond efficiency, the discipline of restraint carries ethical significance. Speaking or writing only what is necessary reduces distortion. It limits exaggeration and prevents emotional overreach. By choosing silence or precision instead of elaboration, communicators leave space for truth to stand on its own. This kind of restraint builds long-term trust, especially in an era of information excess. Ultimately, saying less refines both the message and the mind that forms it. The process of editing, condensing, and choosing essentials strengthens self-awareness. Clarity in expression reflects clarity in intention. When fewer words hold greater weight, communication becomes deliberate, measured, and humane dot as this reflection finds its quiet balance. Another dimension of understanding emerges, not what is said, but how the body and voice together shape what is received. In the next exploration, we turn to aligning body and voice, where nonverbal communication and physiological coherence transform speech from concept into presence. Every act of communication extends beyond words. Long before speech began, human beings relied on posture, gaze, and movement to convey meaning. Even today, the majority of information exchanged between people does not pass through language, but through subtle nonverbal signals. The voice and the body operate as a single system. One carries sound, the other context. When they align, communication feels coherent and trustworthy. When they diverge, tension arises, often sensed before it is understood. Researchers in social neuroscience estimate that as much as 2/3 of emotional meaning in human interaction is transmitted through nonverbal cues. These cues include facial expression, gesture, orientation, and rhythm of movement. Voice is part of this system, functioning as the auditory expression of bodily state. Breath, muscle tone, and autonomic arousal determine how sound emerges. A calm voice, for example, reflects regulated physiology, steady exhalation, relaxed laryngeal muscles, and balanced resonance in the chest and head. The listener perceives that calmness instinctively because their own nervous system responds to the acoustic pattern. Physiologically, speech begins with breath. Air pressure from the lungs sets the vocal folds into vibration, creating a tone that is then shaped by the throat, mouth, and facial cavities. Every emotional state modifies this process. Stress shortens. The exhalation phase, tightening muscles around the neck and jaw. The resulting sound becomes higher, thinner, and less stable. Relaxation lengthens the breath cycle, lowering pitch and adding resonance. This connection explains why vocal training often begins with posture and breathing rather than articulation. The voice cannot project clarity if the body itself is in tension. Modern imaging techniques confirm this link. Functional magnetic resonance studies show synchronized activation between regions controlling posture and those controlling speech. When a person adjusts their stance, for instance, lifting the sternum and aligning the spine, neural activity in vocal motor areas increases. The body literally supports the voice. This integration extends to emotion. When posture becomes expansive and balanced, cortisol levels drop and vocal tone deepens naturally. Communication experts refer to this harmony as embodied congruence. It describes a state in which verbal, vocal, and physical signals convey the same message. Congruence is not theatrical performance. It is physiological alignment. Listeners detect it subconsciously. In controlled experiments, observers could predict honesty of speakers with accuracy well above chance simply by watching brief clips without sound. The brain's mirror neuron system interprets bodily coherence as sincerity because in authentic states, motor patterns are smooth and rhythmically consistent. Gesture contributes directly to cognitive fluency. Neuroscientists studying gesture-speech coupling found that moving the hands rhythmically while speaking synchronizes activity between motor and language centers in the brain. This coordination lightens mental load, improving verbal flow and recall. Speakers deprived of the ability to gesture show increased hesitations and reduced lexical variety. The phenomenon demonstrates that thinking is not confined to the brain. It extends through the body. Movement becomes part of thought itself. In interpersonal communication, alignment between body and voice shapes trust. A speaker whose words express calm, but whose body shows tension, sends conflicting cues. The listener's limbic system perceives danger even when the conscious mind hears reassurance. This mismatch triggers subtle defensive responses: lowered attention, reduced empathy, and faster heart rate. Consistency, by contrast, signals safety. When voice, face, and posture form a unified rhythm, the listener's physiology synchronizes. Heart rate steadies, breathing slows, and mutual understanding deepens. Cultural variations influence how alignment is interpreted, yet the underlying biology remains stable. In Mediterranean cultures, expressive gesture and dynamic vocal range communicate vitality and sincerity. In Northern European contexts, smaller gestures and steady tone convey the same meaning. Across societies, the body-voice coherence itself, not its style, determines credibility. The human nervous system detects coordination, not cultural form. Public speaking research provides measurable evidence. Audiences consistently rate presenters with synchronized gestures, balanced stance, and even tempo as more confident and persuasive. Eye-tracking studies show that observers' gaze follows speakers' hands and faces rhythmically when these movements match vocal emphasis. When gestures occur out of sync, attention fragments. The body functions as a conductor for the voice, directing focus through movement. Voice analysis adds another layer. Acoustic parameters such as pitch variability, volume stability, and resonance all depend on muscular alignment. When posture collapses or breathing becomes shallow, airflow decreases and resonance diminishes. The sound loses brightness and projection. Speech therapists correct this not by forcing volume, but by restoring structural support. Once alignment returns, vocal energy increases without strain. The result is what professionals call effortless power, strength that arises from balance rather than force. The importance of alignment extends to digital communication as well. In video conferences or recorded presentations, where sensory input is limited, small discrepancies between body and voice become amplified. Delayed eye focus, inconsistent tone, or rigid posture disrupt perceived authenticity. Media training now emphasizes integrated expression, grounding the body before speech, maintaining gentle movement, and aligning breathing with phrasing. The goal is not performance, but presence, to convey a sense of calm coherence that translates even through a screen. A single gentle metaphor captures the essence of this connection. The body and the voice are like strings tuned to the same frequency. When one tightens or loosens beyond balance, harmony fades. The sound may still exist, but its resonance diminishes. In conversation, that harmony is trust. The listener hears not only words, but the consistency between sound and stance. From a psychological perspective, alignment also influences self-perception. Studies on embodied cognition reveal that adopting open, grounded posture and calm tone feeds back into emotional state, increasing confidence and reducing anxiety. The brain interprets the physical configuration as evidence of stability and adjusts internal chemistry accordingly. This feedback loop demonstrates that communication begins within the communicator. By aligning body and voice, one not only expresses calm, but generates it. In therapeutic and educational environments, body-voice alignment aids regulation and learning. Teachers who maintain steady rhythm and movement and tone create classrooms where students feel secure. Therapists who speak with grounded posture transmit calm that clients unconsciously mirror. These effects stem from social entrainment, the synchronization of biological rhythms across individuals. Alignment spreads through observation, guiding collective states without explicit instruction. Leadership training increasingly integrates this science. Executives and diplomats learn to coordinate gesture, breathing, and tone as part of communication ethics. The emphasis lies not on manipulation, but on transparency, ensuring that nonverbal cues match stated values. Such authenticity fosters resilience under pressure, as physiological coherence supports mental clarity. The ability to remain aligned while addressing conflict distinguishes confident leadership from reactive control. Technology allows these dynamics to be measured precisely. Motion capture and acoustic software can track synchronization between bodily movement and vocal pattern. Data reveal that successful communicators maintain rhythmic coupling at roughly 2 cycles per second between gesture and prosody. This tempo corresponds to natural human motor rhythms, such as walking. In essence, speech that moves like the body feels intuitively trustworthy because it reflects the biological cadence of life. Ultimately, aligning body and voice is an act of integrity, an internal agreement between thought, emotion, and expression. It transforms communication from mechanical transmission into genuine presence. Through alignment, ideas gain texture, tone gains credibility, and silence gains meaning. As this reflection settles, the next step of communication becomes less about expression and more about temperament. Beyond coordination lies something deeper, the ability to remain steady and composed even in uncertainty. In the following exploration, we will consider the slow confidence, how patience, rhythm, and calm persistence form the lasting foundation of persuasive and peaceful communication. True confidence does not rush. It does not demand attention or seek constant confirmation. It moves with steadiness, shaped by patience and presence. In the science of communication, confidence is less a display of dominance than an expression of internal regulation. It arises when body, mind, and message remain synchronized, when speech, tone, and gesture flow at a pace that allows awareness to keep up with expression. Psychologists describe confidence as a product of predictability. The nervous system feels secure when outcomes are consistent with expectations. In conversation, people sense this security through rhythm and composure. A speaker who pauses naturally and maintains steady tone signals control of both content and emotion. This perceived stability activates the listener's parasympathetic system, the branch responsible for calm and trust. In this biological feedback loop, the speaker's steadiness becomes the listener's ease. The neuroscience of confidence highlights the role of the prefrontal cortex, which manages planning and self-regulation. When an individual speaks slowly and deliberately, neural activity shifts from the limbic system, the center of impulsive reaction, toward the prefrontal regions associated with intentionality. Measured pace, therefore, reflects cognitive control. Rapid or fragmented speech, by contrast, indicates limbic dominance and triggers corresponding tension in the listener. The tempo of communication thus reveals where emotion resides within the nervous system. Researchers in vocal psychology note that confident speakers exhibit moderate variability in pitch and volume. Their voices avoid both monotony and volatility, staying within a range that suggests flexibility without instability. Acoustic analyses of leadership speech patterns confirm that audiences respond most positively to tempo between 100 and 120 words per minute, roughly the rate of calm conversation. Faster delivery often creates pressure. Slower delivery can appear hesitant. Within that natural rhythm, pauses serve as markers of authority. They demonstrate that the speaker does not fear silence. That thought continues even when words rest. Physiologically, confidence depends on breathing. Slow exhalation activates the vagus nerve, lowering heart rate and stabilizing vocal tone. Speakers who train themselves to extend the out-breath by even 2 seconds show measurable reductions in stress hormones and improvements in vocal resonance. This small adjustment influences not only perception but biology. A composed voice, sustained by calm breathing, aligns with the listener's autonomic rhythms. The body itself becomes a medium of trust. The psychology of timing reinforces this principle. Studies on first impressions show that observers assess confidence within less than 1 second of encountering a voice or face. These judgments, though subconscious, depend on micro-patterns of motion, head angle, blink rate, and pacing of response. Fast, irregular gestures imply anxiety. Steady, unhurried movement conveys assurance. Confidence, therefore, manifests in time as much as in tone. The ability to occupy a moment fully rather than race through a dot in educational contexts. Teachers who speak slowly and clearly improve comprehension and participation. Their pacing allows students to anticipate structure and reduces cognitive strain. Likewise, physicians who deliver information calmly enhance patient adherence to treatment. The pattern repeats across professions. Composure promotes clarity. In neuroscience terms, predictable rhythm supports the brain's predictive coding system, allowing listeners to forecast what comes next. This sense of coherence feels like confidence, even when the listener cannot articulate why. A single gentle metaphor illustrates this. Confidence is like the growth of a tree. It does not rush toward height. It strengthens through layers, each formed slowly over time. The metaphor matches the biological truth. Repeated calm exposure to challenge thickens neural connections within regions, responsible for control and resilience. Each deliberate act of patience becomes another ring of stability. Confidence also interacts with cultural norms. In some societies, quick, energetic delivery signifies competence. In others, measured pace expresses respect and intelligence. Despite these variations, universal markers remain: steady rhythm, balanced tone, and consistency between word and gesture. Across cultures, confidence feels slow because slowness conveys mastery of time, the sense that one is not being carried by urgency, but is guiding it. Communication. Scientists identify 2 forms of confidence: performative and internalized. Performative confidence relies on technique, posture, projection, and scripted control. Internalized confidence stems from genuine alignment of values and actions. Listeners can distinguish them unconsciously. The former may impress briefly, but fades under pressure. The latter endures because it arises from congruence. When intention, language, and physiology move in harmony, confidence becomes self-sustaining. From the standpoint of emotional intelligence, slow confidence connects directly to empathy. People who remain calm in dialogue create emotional safety for others. Their steady rhythm allows room for difference and reflection. This quality transforms persuasion into cooperation. Psychologists refer to it as secure presence, the ability to hold space without dominance. Secure presence correlates with high vagal tone, a physiological marker of emotional resilience. It represents confidence, not as aggression, but as calm availability. Training in communication increasingly integrates these findings. Professionals practice techniques such as deliberate pacing, controlled breathing, and mindful pause to strengthen clarity. Yet the goal is not performance, but awareness, feeling the connection between thought and expression. When pace slows, the mind perceives details once hidden by speed: inflection, facial micro-movements, the subtle response of the listener. This sensitivity deepens authenticity, which in turn reinforces confidence. Slow confidence also resists the modern culture of immediacy. Constant acceleration in speech, decision, and response fragments attention and erodes trust. Taking time to think before speaking or to pause before answering restores depth. Studies in digital communication show that users who reply with slight delay, accompanied by thoughtful wording, are perceived as more reliable. In both online and physical environments, measured timing signals consideration. Ethically, slow confidence protects integrity. By speaking at a pace that allows reflection, communicators reduce impulsive exaggeration and error. They create conditions in which truth can emerge without distortion. The absence of haste permits nuance, the foundation of honest discourse. The result is communication that feels stable, a quality increasingly rare in environments shaped by urgency. Neuropsychological models suggest that repeated practice of calm expression rewires pathways involved in emotional control. Each time a person maintains steady rhythm during stress, the amygdala's reactivity decreases slightly. Over months, this adjustment becomes permanent, forming what researchers call trait calmness. The process demonstrates that confidence is not a fixed trait, but a trainable outcome of deliberate pacing. Ultimately, slow confidence transforms perception. It shifts communication from reaction to presence, from persuasion to clarity. It embodies respect for self, for listener, and for time itself. The speaker who allows pauses acknowledges that understanding cannot be forced. It unfolds. This rhythm of patience conveys authority more enduring than volume or speed. As this reflection nears completion, one final theme begins to rise quietly. Beyond tone, rhythm, and timing lies the resonance that remains after communication ends, the lingering impression of meaning that continues to echo within the listener's mind. In the next and final exploration, we turn to the echo of meaning, where all elements converge, intention, tone, silence, and rhythm, forming the enduring trace of understanding. When conversation ends, something remains. Long after words have faded, the listener continues to process their rhythm, tone, and intention. Meaning, unlike sound, does not vanish at the edge of silence. It lingers in thought, in emotion, and sometimes even in physiology. Scientists who study memory and language call this phenomenon post-communication resonance, the persistence of understanding beyond the moment of exchange. It is the echo of meaning. Cognitive neuroscience explains this echo through a process known as reverberation. After a conversation, neural circuits that were active during listening continue to fire in repeating patterns for several seconds or even minutes. This repetition strengthens synaptic connections, transforming temporary impressions into long-term memories. The quality of the echo depends on attention and emotion. Calm, focused dialogue produces coherent activation. Chaotic or aggressive communication generates noise. In this sense, meaning leaves a physical trace in the brain, not as words, but as rhythm of activation. Emotion deepens the echo. The amygdala, responsible for assigning emotional significance to experiences, interacts with the hippocampus during recollection. When communication feels respectful or supportive, these structures record it more vividly. Studies show that emotionally balanced conversations produce higher memory retention and lower stress, reactivity in later interactions. The body remembers tone as much as content. This is why people often recall how a discussion made them feel, even when specific phrases are forgotten. From a psychological perspective, the echo of meaning defines the moral texture of communication. Words that arise from clarity and kindness expand in the listener's mind. Those delivered in haste or anger contract. The listener continues the dialogue internally, interpreting, comparing, and re-experiencing it. Social psychologists describe this as semantic afterglow, the internal continuation of a conversation that shapes future perception. When communication is grounded in patience, this afterglow supports reflection rather than rumination, that the rhythm of understanding contributes to this continuation. When speech follows natural cadence, periods of sound balanced by silence, the brain predicts and recalls structure more easily. This temporal predictability, established during conversation, becomes a mental template. Later, when the listener revisits the idea, the same neural timing patterns reactivate, giving the sensation of continuity. Thus, meaning has rhythm even in memory, that language itself carries inertia. Words, once heard, influence associative networks across the brain. A single concept can activate dozens of related representations, images, emotions, and memories that continue to interact long after the conversation has ended. Linguists call this semantic propagation. It explains why a single thoughtful phrase may inspire reflection for days. In calm, deliberate communication, this propagation remains organized. In rushed speech, it disperses chaotically. The difference lies in coherence. Ideas framed with rhythm and care maintain shape as they echo through the mind. Cultural studies reveal that many traditions recognize this principle intuitively. Ancient rhetoric emphasized kairos, the right timing and measure of speech, as essential for lasting impact. Eastern philosophy describes language as a vibration that continues beyond hearing. Modern science gives this intuition form. Neural oscillations recorded after speech correspond to internal rehearsal, the biological basis of thought shaped by prior sound. The metaphor of echo thus becomes literal. The brain vibrates with the memory of vova. Communication. The echo of meaning also functions socially. In relationships, repeated exposure to certain patterns of language establishes emotional climate. Partners who exchange supportive and measured speech show increased synchronization of heart rate and hormonal cycles over time. This physiological attunement strengthens trust, forming what sociologists term communicative stability. In contrast, cycles of criticism or abrupt tone create stress anticipation, even in silence. The echo, whether gentle or sharp, becomes the background rhythm of the relationship. Education demonstrates the same phenomenon. Teachers who close lessons with clear summaries and calm tone improve knowledge retention. The final moments of instruction anchor the emotional state associated with learning. Neurologically, this is the recency effect. Information presented last receives privileged access to long-term storage. When closure feels balanced, the echo supports curiosity rather than exhaustion, that the echo of meaning extends beyond individuals. In collective communication, speeches, media, culture, words create shared memory. Public discourse leaves imprints in social networks, influencing beliefs long after direct exposure. Psychologists studying narrative persuasion note that stories delivered with calm coherence alter attitudes more persistently than those relying on shock or urgency. The gentle voice endures. The loud one fades. This endurance reflects the principle of low arousal persuasion. Messages that respect cognitive pace generate durable understanding. From a neurochemical perspective, this endurance involves dopamine and oxytocin. Calm communication releases small, steady amounts of these neurotransmitters, which strengthen associative learning and emotional bonding. Intense or aggressive communication floods the system briefly, creating excitement but poor retention. The echo of meaning, therefore, depends on moderation. It mirrors the biology of balance, slow waves lasting longer than sudden bursts. A single quiet metaphor captures this truth. Meaning is like a tone struck on a bell. Its resonance continues long after the hand withdraws. The listener's mind, like air around the bell, carries the vibration until it fades naturally. The clarity of that echo depends on how cleanly the tone was produced, on precision, rhythm, and absence of noise. Communication works the same way. Intention shapes the purity of resonance. In professional communication, this principle guides effective closure. Negotiators and mediators know that the final tone of a conversation influences all subsequent interpretation. Ending with calm acknowledgement, even without full agreement, leaves a constructive echo that encourages future cooperation. The final moments matter because memory privileges them. The conclusion defines the story that continues internally. From an ethical standpoint, awareness of the echo invites responsibility. Every statement, however brief, becomes part of another person's cognitive landscape. The trace of one's tone may remain for hours or years, influencing self-perception or belief. Understanding this permanence encourages restraint and compassion in speech. The goal of communication becomes not victory, but resonance. To leave behind patterns that foster clarity rather than confusion. As neuroscience, psychology, and linguistics converge on this understanding, a simple lesson emerges. Communication is never finished at the moment it ends. It lives on in neural circuits, in social memory, and in emotional atmosphere. The echo of meaning shapes future dialogue, forming a quiet continuity between minds. Perhaps this is the true essence of effective communication, to create understanding that continues without presence, clarity that survives silence. When intention, rhythm, and tone align, the echo becomes gentle rather than fading. It carries comprehension forward, bridging time and distance. And as this final reflection draws to stillness, the circle of our exploration closes softly. Every breath of speech, every pause, every word chosen with care contributes to the unseen architecture of meaning. What remains is not the sound itself, but its resonance, calm, coherent, and enduring, the quiet science of being understood. Thank you for spending this calm moment with me, a quiet space where science meets rest. If the rhythm of understanding brought you peace tonight, let it echo a little longer. I'd love for you to join the next gentle exploration here on Calm Science Sleep. Please subscribe, leave a like, and share your thoughts. It helps new listeners find this calm corner of science and keeps me motivated to create more thoughtful journeys.